Is it working? It should be working. Okay. So Flexbox. So just by a raise of hand, how many people here are not using Flexbox? So specifically are not using Flexbox. They do not use it. Okay. So the goal of this presentation is to get you to use Flexbox, to get you to see the importance of using Flexbox. This one. Can you all hear me better now? Now I have an echo. I sound weird. Okay, so Flexbox. Flexbox is a CSS layout mode. It's a way to present all of your content on your page. So there's two things. There's HTML and there's CSS, and they both have two different responsibilities. HTML is in charge of the semantic meaning of the document, of the different content on the page. And CSS should strictly be the presentation of said document. It should be the style and some of the layout concerns of that document. So you should be able to have one document, and it should be able to have one semantic meaning, but it should also be able to be presented in any number of ways without having to alter that document at all. So let's see. So Flexbox. Flexbox is a layout mode providing for the arrangement of elements on a page such that elements behave predictably when a page layout must accommodate different screen modes and different display devices. So a layout mode, there's different layout modes in CSS. There's block, inline, table, even fixed positioned, Flexbox, and if we have time, I'm hoping we can also cover a future one called grids, which is really cool. So Flexbox. Can we use Flexbox? Okay. So who's familiar with Can I Use? Everyone go there fairly often. I use it a lot. So here we can clearly see Flexbox is actually currently very, very well adopted in browsers. There's a few little bugs in IE 11. I'm not sure what your support for different browsers looks like. Some care, some don't at this point. I'm actually curious, how many people in their current, what's the word I'm looking for, their browser support of their apps and their pages, how many of you are still supporting IE? There's still a few of you? Okay. So it would probably be important for you to come and take a look at some of these issues. They're nothing really crazy. And in fact, I don't have that prepared. There is a GitHub repo. I'll post it in Slack today, or looks like Jared will post that for me right now. But it's a repo that has all of the known bugs and issues with Flexbox and all of the ways to all the solutions to those errors, those problems. And they're nothing terribly big, and it's just a few things. But as you can see, the support is very, very good for Flexbox and has been for a good while. Oh, actually, I do have it here. So right here, Flexbugs. So there's quite a few.
We're not seeing that, by the way.
Oh, you're not seeing that? That's right. Sorry, I have two screens. You guys only have one. Okay, so Flexbugs. Here we go. So the bugs and their workarounds. So we got minimum content sizing. Let's just take a look at these real quick. When flex items are too big to fit inside the container, those items are instructed by flex layout algorithm to shrink. So this bug is things are shrinking when they're not supposed to be shrinking.
That might be too much detail considering you don't know what Flexbox
Right,
is yet.
right. But just kind of an idea. There's little workarounds for some of these.
Basically, you can use it now regardless.
Right.
Unless
That is the point.
Like ID 9 or
There-
8.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna try and dive into the syntax a little bit today, and I'm actually going to be spending a lot of time on I have, for those that are looking at the slides later on or right now, I've got all of the syntax here with some basic descriptions, and here's some of the terminology, but I'm actually going to spend a lot of time on this website because this is the website that I go to for whenever I'm doing anything with Flexbox. And it is the most comprehensive guide I've seen anywhere. So some of the basic terminology that we're going to cover today. So with Flexbox, you have there's two main ideas that you need to understand. There's a flex container and flex items. The flex container contains the flex items. So the first syntax that we'll cover is display flex. So right here, on an item, you declare this is going to be a display flex item, and that instantly makes that item a flex container, and all of its immediate children flex items. So that's a key thing to remember. So here in this diagram, there's some terminology that we need to understand. So there's the cross size and the main size of said container. The main size is typically the sum of the length, like the width or the height, depending upon the orientation of or the direction of the flex container of the children. So it's the size of the children, and then the cross size is the other, so it'd be the other width or length. And then we've got the main axis and the cross axis. So I just decided we're going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about flex direction before we talk about some of those terminologies a little more. So flex direction, if you remember, we have the flex container and the flex children. Flex direction, you've got four options. The default, note the default is row, but what it declares is the direction that those items are going to be distributed within the flex parent. So row, they'll be distributed from left to right. Row reverse is right to left, and then column is down and up, up and down. You get the idea. So that determines the orientation that the cross and whether the cross will be horizontal or vertical, so on and so forth. Flex wrap is basically whether the items will wrap or not. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sure you're going to get to this, so maybe I should hold off. But is it appropriate then to do embedded containers if you want to disrupt the flow in a different direction on a row?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if you're going from left to right, dictating the flow, and then within a row you want to go horizontal also, just for one row, would you end up doing embedded containers?
So like you'd have a container within a flex parent. So yes, you can't have flex parents within, like a flex item can also be a flex parent, meaning its children will then be, and you can have them go however you want within that child. Niels?
Just a note on your row reverse and row direction. If you do direction RTL, I think I might say that in here somewhere. It will actually switch it out for you. So if you do have Arabic or one of these languages that's right to left, then flex direction will reverse itself. By the language.
So what? Oh, it'll go based on the language. That's what you're saying. Oh, okay.
Using the direction.
I actually didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. So thank you, Niels. Niels, everybody. Okay, so flex wrap. Note the default is no wrap, so the items will be forced to stay within their column or row. They'll just get squished or overflowed if there's not enough room. And wrap is they'll continue to wrap into multiple rows or columns depending upon the direction. And then wrap reverse is just reverse the direction in which they'll wrap. And then we have FlexFlow. And FlexFlow is actually the property that I use all the time. I don't actually use FlexWrap and FlexDirection like ever. I always just use FlexFlow because it's just the shorthand for the two of them. So you just then declare whether it's going to be a row or row reverse or column, and then you declare if it's a wrap or no wrap or wrap reverse. And you do all within this one property, FlexFlow. Justify content. So justify content determines how the flex items will then be distributed within that within the flex parent along the main axis. So if we currently have a row, so in this example we currently are dealing with a row parent, and so we got flex start, so all the items will be aligned, and if there's any leftover room afterwards, then it's just left blank. Flex end is the opposite. Flex center, it actually centers the element, so it gives even an equal amount of the extra space on either side of all of the children. Space between, that space is placed in between. Space around, so on and so forth. Note the default is flex start. And then align items. So align items is like justify content, except we're distributing the items along the cross axis. So flex start, it's going to be push all the items to the beginning. Flex end is at the bottom. Center is center of the parent, so we'd be centering them along the main axis. And then stretch. Stretch will take up the full space. And stretch is actually the default. Okay, align content. So this is like align items, except for the individual rows or columns. It determines how those will be distributed within the parent. And note that stretch, again, is the default there. And now, there's a few properties that you can give the children. The first one is order. And order can be any positive integer. No, actually, it can be negative as well. It's the one. The other ones that I'll get to in a minute cannot be negative, but this one can be negative. And it simply determines, this is one way that you can change the order of elements within their parent. Keep in mind that it only will disrupt the order within the parent, and you can never get a single child to go outside of its parent in the flow. So this takes it, the largest number will be placed later. So the smaller numbers, it goes lowest to greatest, ascending in that way. Flex grow. So occasionally when you have your items, you have your children, and you have your parent, the items don't take up the full width. Altogether, they don't take up the full width of the parent. And so flex grow is a way for you to find which children should take up that extra space. If you don't declare flex grow on any of the children, then none of them will grow, and that extra space will just sit there and be unused, which might be what you want. But flex grow determines the portion of that extra space that should be distributed to that child. So here we have three children, and they all have a flex grow of 1, meaning all of them are going to get an equal portion of that extra space. In this one, the second element has 2 portions, so it's going to get twice as much of that extra space. So say we had 8 m's of extra space. In this example, the first element would get 2, the second element would get 4, and the third element would get 2. And they would be increased by that much, their widths or their heights. Does that all make sense? Is there any questions? Yes?
Just to note, those are all relative to one another. So if you have a
Right, exactly. So,
Repeat that.
the comment was if say you had 3 elements and you had flex grow of 4 on all of them, then that would be the equivalent of them all being 1. So they're relative to each other.
What's the difference in that and like percentages piece of it?
So with flex grow, it actually looks at how much space is left over rather than the space of the parent altogether. So percentages is the space altogether of the parent, like the whole width of the parent, whereas flex grow is a little more dynamic. It's a little more flexible. And so it just looks at how much space is actually left over in this parent or on this row or this column, and that's distributed accordingly. Does that make sense? Okay, so flex shrink.
Can I offer a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
So I don't know who asked the question about. You asked the question about percentages. So percentages are based on 100, right? Or based on 1, I guess. So if you have 2 flex items that are 1, 1, the base is 2, and so your total amount that you can have is 2. Each one gets 1 out of 2. 1 out of 2 is a half. So it's similar to percentages under the hood. You're not dealing with base 100. You're dealing with base n, based on how many flex items you have,
Which gives you
and then the total value of those numbers. So if you have flex 2 and flex 1, you've got 3. N is 3, and so you've got 2 out of 3 and 1 out of 3. Instead of always dealing with base 100 or base 1 for percentages.
When you get the base is 2, that's where you can put percentages, determine how much to initially start with. And then it'll grow and shrink, changes whether or not it can adjust.
Also the percentage, then children have the grow.
So he'll
Yeah.
get to that.
Yeah, I have quite a few examples that I want to get to. No, you're fine. Any questions are welcome. In fact, we have another one.
Beyond that, this is a percentage of what is the remaining space, not the total space.
Right.
So it won't, unless you're playing with shrink for enough, but yet it's not going to steal from something else, whereas percentage would just say, I'm 100% with the width. This would say, I'm 100% with the remaining width. Yeah,
If none of the other items also have.
yeah, if none of the other items.
And I don't know, maybe this is just me personally, maybe I'm just doing things wrong, but times where I use percentages, sometimes I might make a miscalculation and if they add up to anything more than 100, then things that I wouldn't expect happen, right? So if they all have to be strictly 100, like those percentages and no extras, so I have to make sure to use box sizing, border box, if I have borders, and other things can get in the way, and it can become a headache, and it's like, I can't get this to be quite right. Whereas with Flexbox, it's going to go ahead and just figure out, oh, well, you have like 2 extra pixels here. We'll just go ahead and distribute those accordingly for you. You don't have to even think about it. So it kind of takes away some of that cruft that you just don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to worry about it because it's not important for you to worry about. So flex shrink, we'll go ahead and get back to these. We promise we're almost done with some of the syntax, and then we'll get into some more interesting examples. Flex shrink is similar to flex grow, except shrinking. It says, hey, this element can actually shrink if you need it to. If there's not enough room and you need something to shrink, this is one of those elements that can shrink for within this parent. And then we have flex basis. Flex basis is it's a bit different. I don't have a great way to explain the difference between just it and just using a basic length. Flexbox does some smart calculations with it, but essentially you're saying, this is the default size of the element. Say it's 20 ems or 10% or whatever unit of measurement you want to use. And that can either be a length property, so like 20 ems, a percentage or whatever, or it can be auto. And auto just says, I have a length or a width or whatever property already assigned, use that. And that's what it'll do. And then the last property, oh, no, I lied. We have one more after this. The second to last property is flex. And I never, like what was the other one, flex flow, I never use the other ones because flex is shorthand for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. So I never use those three properties. I always just use flex. And so it's like flex flow. You just enter in those three properties, and it'll automatically do all that work for you. So it goes flex grow, flex shrink, and then flex basis. Those three properties. The default is 0, 1 in auto. So a flex grow of 1, a flex shrink, or a flex grow of 0, excuse me, flex shrink of 1, and a flex basis of auto. And then we have align self. So align self is, I personally don't know if there's really a great use case for this, but it's good to know that it's available for you. I don't know, some people that, I don't know, I'll look to like someone like Nils. Have you ever used align self?
I think I've used it, but
You can't think of any actual good use case for it? Yeah, I mean, it's...
One use case is, for example, if you have navigation, and you want to do a logo and a set of links on like a logo on the top, and then your navigation links over on the right, you can align self the logo over to the left to the start, and then the links over to the right. So they're all in one container, but they have different alignments.
Right. So I should explain a little more for those that are unfamiliar. It's essentially a way to determine, sorry, I kind of skipped that. It's a way to determine the align item for a particular child. So align items declares it for all of the children are going to align this particular way. Align self is to say, hey, this one item is going to do something outside of that. You have a comment?
It works on the cross axis. So actually to make that work, you'd have to do something.
Right. And so remember, align items is aligning them according to the cross axis. That's important to remember.
So to do what I think Nils was describing, you'd actually have to do a flex column.
Yeah, we would need to be a flex column.
And then do that alignment that way.
Right. Oh, and just for recording purposes, I'll reiterate what Neil said. One use case for it is if you have a column of items with a logo and nav items, and you wanted the logo to be aligned in a different way than the nav items. So say you have the nav items aligned left, and you want the logo to be aligned right, or vice versa, or whatever. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get into a couple examples. So center element. So how I've made these examples is I have the way that you would do it without Flexbox and a way you would do it with Flexbox, so that we can kind of compare and contrast the differences between the two. So align element. I've actually got two ways. They're pretty similar ways, but two ways that you can do this without Flexbox. So as you can see, all we have is this. We have a parent and a child. And we want this child to be aligned both vertically and horizontally. So one way that we could do that without Flexbox is we would need, and in this example, we would need the child to have a set width and a set height. They have to be known and constant and not changing ever. And then we do a position absolute and use top and left properties to move them 50% to the left in the parent and 50% from and use the top property to move it 50% down of the parent's height. And then we have to use, so if we look here, so that would move it like this. And then we have to use negative margins on the top and on the right equal to half of the child's width and height. And that's the reason why the width and height of that child need to be known.
So this is pretty fragile is what you're getting at?
Yes, this is a very fragile if, say, the content is different, or there's a lot of ways that this can break. And, I mean, it gets the job done.
That's gross.
Yes, it is very gross. I don't like it. I think you shouldn't use it especially since we have Flexbox and other ways. Another way that is less gross, it's actually not really bad. It's not that bad, actually, is we use translate instead of negative margins. So we just use, and with this one, the height and width of the child can be anything. It doesn't matter. It can just be dynamic, and it'll automatically work. Right, comment?
That approach will blur your text from certain instances.
This one?
You'll end up with blurry text.
Hmm.
Only from with that approach.
Okay.
You can fix it sometimes using the filter property, set the blur to 0. Sometimes fix your blurry text, but
So you're saying it'll give it a blur?
yeah, your text will be blurry.
Huh.
Is that
That's a
just
weird
on-
bug. I
is
haven't
that on
encountered
Windows,
that.
or is that on?
What's that?
Is that a Windows Chrome bug? No, Windows font
I've
renderers.
only experienced it on Windows.
Because I mean, I'm on Chrome right now and using it, and
It depends on the
but
width.
yeah.
Certain widths of your element also affect the blurriness of your font.
Oh, I see. I wonder. Huh.
That's what to look out for if you use that approach. You'll end up potentially with blurry text.
So it's the flex way.
Okay.
Save and refresh with that. Calling it out.
Yeah.
Hit save and refresh.
I'll just hit refresh because I have autosave off. Yes, I want to reload. Thanks, CodePen. Try to look out for me. So yeah, you can also note that the item has more of a dynamic width and height to it now. And I did notice with this, it's actually 50% of the parent, and the reason why is because of this translate here. And I bet this might be why that focusing thing's happening. If the element would be off the screen, but then we use translate to make it so it is on the screen, some weird bug could happen. Okay, so anyways, that's the less gross. It's pretty decent way. As we hear, there is some potential bugs with it though, with it being blurred. But now let's look at the Flexway. And the Flexway, one thing I want to note is that with these two, somebody that's a little less familiar, less savvy with CSS and how some of these things work, would look at some of these and not understand that that's what these properties are doing. They wouldn't understand the position absolute and top, and it's like, it doesn't quite, you can read into it and figure it out, but it is a little bit harder, especially when compared to Flexbox. With Flexbox, we say the parent, you're going to be display flex, and we want your content to be centered, and we want you to align items centered. So it's essentially saying we're centered on both axes. The end. It's very verbose in what it's doing. Okay. Any questions on that example? Any comments? Anything? It's pretty simple, not terribly crazy. Okay, so for our next example, it's just a simple nav where we want the items to be aligned horizontally. We want them laid out horizontally. Right now they're vertical, and we want them to be horizontal. Okay, so the non-flex way. Oh, really? Man. Okay, so there we go. We're doing this utilizing floats, float right, float left, display inline on the nav items. And then the flex way, we simply do a flex on the overall container and then a display flex on the nav to get them aligned in a row as well. So note that flex does not reach down into its children's children and do anything. It leaves them completely alone. Okay, we're going to go to the next one. So this one's a little tricky, and I'm definitely not going to dive into how the flexless way works because it is crazy and very hacky and terrible, and you should never do it. But essentially we want the footer to always stay at the bottom or further depending upon the amount of content, so the footer gets pushed down now. But we want it to always stay right there, right? So the flex list example is gross. If anyone actually understands how that works, it took me a while to really figure out how it works, and I don't know if I could really adequately describe how it works, so I'm not going to. But I do want to note that in order to get that one to work, I had to wrap some of the elements in an extra div, which, if you remember, we go back to the responsibilities of CSS and HTML. This CSS requires the semantic markup of the document to be slightly different, which is something you should try to avoid. And Flexbox will help you to do that. So with the Flex example, we didn't have to do that. And the thing that powers this one, so we're doing a column no wrap, but the thing that powers it is on the content, so this one, this element, we do a flex grow of 1. So there's that extra space at the bottom that would be there. So I'll go ahead and show that real quick. There's this extra space down here at the bottom, and with the flex grow, we say, hey, this middle item should have that, and then we're done. This is so much more easy to understand and work with than that other hacky way, which is really gross. Now we have a reorder, so we want the nav and the content. We want the nav, it's actually technically first in the document. We want it to be to the right. So the non-flex way to do that, we're using some floats. And now it's on the left. So we didn't actually change the markup, which is correct. We don't want to have to do that just for a style, just for some layout. And then with flex, we simply use the order property on the nav item, and that changes the order. Okay, now we have a basic layout. Let's see how much time we got. Still got a good amount of time. So we have this basic layout, and we want, I'll just show you. It's taking too long to explain how it's supposed to look, and I can just do this. So we have this layout, and we also have a breakpoint in here to make them to be mobile responsive. So actually we have a breakpoint for when it's larger, because mobile first. And so note that this technically is not a sticky footer in this example, this flexless example, because the sticky footer that's flexless is gross. Just to reiterate that, I just really hate the sticky footer flexless way of doing it. That's terrible. Okay. And then with flex, we use 2 flex parents to achieve the same thing. But also note that I was able to get it without any media queries, just using some dimensions on these elements. So this one needs to be 25 ems, this one's 20%, and that achieves essentially the same responsive design without any media queries. But with this one, I do want to note on this particular one, I had to use a wrapper on the sidebar and on the main content to get it to work, even in Flex. So Flex still has some shortcomings, which gets me to the last point that I'm actually really happy I can get to this. Yeah.
Quick, when you talk about 20% and 25 ems, what specific attribute is that affecting?
This element here and this element
I
here.
mean the CSS
Flex
properties.
basis.
Oh, that's the flex basis. So FlexFlow.
Flex basis.
So FlexFlow has, remember, it has 3 properties, and they can be optional. So if you give it so here you notice in Flex, the Flex property expects you to give it a flex grow, a flex shrink, and a flex basis. Well, you can also give it just a flex grow and a flex basis, and it's able to recognize, hey, this is a length. This isn't just an integer. So that must be the flex basis property. So that's what's happening here. So I'm not redefining the flex shrink property in this particular one. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm glad we're able to get to CSS grids. So CSS grids, there's another CSS Tricks article that has all of the syntax and everything on that. I'm not going to get into it too much. And also note that this is a future feature that's coming to CSS. It is not here yet. It's kind of here in Edge and IE, but it's behind a prefix. And then in Firefox and Chrome, it's behind a developer flag, so can't use it in prod at all. You can play around with it on your own machines, but you have to actually manually change that flag on the browser. Safari, the support's coming, but it's not here yet. But I wanted to show it to you because of how powerful it is. So with CSS grids, I currently have the flag on this browser flip so that I can use the feature. So I would advise anyone that's even remotely interested in it to go and play around with this. You can play around with this example if you want even. But notice how my markup here is completely semantic. I have no wrappers. I don't have anything. I just have my header, my main, my sidebar, and my footer. Nothing else. And what I do with CSS grids, I'll actually start here in the app. So this is the main, I guess, wrapper of all of those 4 elements.
Could you get rid of that wrapper and just use body?
Yeah, you could do that. I did this for better demonstration. I mean, there's lots of ways you can do it. You always have all of your elements wrapped by something. So yes, you could have the body be that wrapper. But what you do is you define the grid. And so we go, one sec. So this is the mobile first. So when we're here, so I am using a media query, we simply declare we're going to have 4 rows. The first one's going to be 2 ems tall. The second one's going to be 2 ems tall. The third one's going to be auto, just automatic, and take up, it's essentially kind of like grow. It's going to grow to whatever it needs. And then the 4th row is going to be 2 ems. And then we then have these little strings here, say header, sidebar, main, footer. Right? That doesn't really mean much right there. But on these elements, so on app header, I tell it your grid area is header, and that is what correlates with this header. So we're declaring this element is going to take up the grid area of header, which is that area. So that's where CSS grids places it. Where this gets really cool is when we start to do this type of thing. So now, in this media query, we have rows and columns. One of the special lengths that you can use with CSS grids is this FR, which is kind of similar to grow. It's the free room, the room that's available after everything else, essentially. So it's kind of like a percentage. But instead of percentage of the overall parent, it's the leftover space. And again, it's a portion like FlexGrow is. So we've got these 3 columns, 50 pixels, 3 FR, 50 pixels, 1 FR. And then we have 3 rows, 2 ems, auto, 2 ems. And we're able to declare, so in each of those cells, the top are going to be header, 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 header. And then in the second row, main, main, main. So as you can see, this right here is essentially declaring our entire grid and where those flex areas are going to reside. And where this gets really interesting, and when I first played with this, it was like, that is the coolest thing ever. It just blew my mind. I can go sidebar like this, and immediately the side nav will then take up that space. And please note, there's no wrappers here. There's no other things going on here. CSS grids just did it.
You can do this in tables.
Please tell me this is as mind-blowing to you guys as it was to me. It's just like, what? I didn't do anything. All I did was change this one word right here, and it took care of that entire problem for me. I didn't have to do any other weird semantics. I didn't
What
have to do.
happens if they're not lined up? Like if you switch sidebar.
So like if I was to do something like I put sidebar here, right? This would break it. It just doesn't even know what to
Some would
Clearly,
say
that's what you meant.
I think that's art.
do. This is exactly what I wanted. Right.
Stick with tables, it doesn't do that.
Right. Yeah. Let's do tables. Let's do our layout with tables, people. It'd be great. No. So that's actually about all I have. So I'm actually ending a little sooner. Jared rushed me, and no,
I asked how much time.
you screwed me up. So that's all I have.
So when do you think grids would even approach usable in support?
In support,
Yeah, like when,
I have to go talk to Google and
2017,
Firefox.
2018. Have you looked into it?
I wasn't able to find really anything that said when it would be coming to full support. But I mean, I want it. I want it more than anything, and I'm sure that it will come. I mean, it should. So, but yeah, I don't have any information on when it will come. So, is there any other questions, thoughts?
I have a dumb question.
Yes.
Are we able to drill down into some of the definitions of these, this style? Like if you, for instance, want to know what grid template columns, what's defined underneath it and how the browser interprets that?
I haven't dug into it like that much at all. There is a different style in which you can define these. I don't know if this really would answer your question or not, but you can actually name the different columns and rows. When I looked at it, I didn't like the style as much. I thought this was much easier to read and reason about. But you can name those columns and those rows, and then on the actual element, so say on the header, we could say we want the header, the column, we want the column to start from this named column point line and go extend to this name, and then from the end and whatever. Does that make sense? So you can
Just mapping them.
right. You can map them that way. But like I said, I prefer this way of using the grid system. But essentially, it would achieve the exact same thing. I think this is easier to work with. That didn't really answer your question, did it?
I was just curious if we had a definition of how it's defined, perhaps we could implement it in an alternative fashion for browser support.
No, I don't know. I like try and polyfill it in a sense. Yeah, that'd be awesome. But no, I don't. I mean, you could find the documentation on how it's supposed to be implemented, and I'm sure it's out there. Chrome and Firefox have it. They're just by flags. So. Anything else? All right. I think we'll go ahead and end there. Thank you very much.
Are you going to share this code then?
Yeah. These are all shared.
So where do we find your slides on Slack?
Sorry.
Where do we find your slides?
We'll have them on integration point. I'll get them up on integration point probably today. Oh, yeah. I can just do that too. Thank you. How do I end